I think we'll get started. And a couple of people may wander in, but that's okay. I think I've seen most of you before, but I'm Christie Neuger, and usually I have my colleague with me, Joretta Marshall, and she sends her greetings to you. Joretta had successful knee replacement surgery last week. It's astounding what they can do. She had the surgery at 1:30 and was home at 4:30.
Wow.
That's just astounding to me. Anyway, so she sends her greetings and she wishes she were here with you. If you remember, we were invited here. Is this picking up a little higher? We were invited here, good, to help you think a little bit about creating a lay care ministry team here at church. I know you've had one. You've had several manifestations, and we are looking at how do you create it again, differently in the particular context that you now work and worship. And we wanted to talk with you together over the weeks to see what you thought about what we might need here at Richfield. And so even today, we've had presentations the first two sessions. I'm going to do a little talking today, but I'm going to be asking you to consult a lot of our time today on what we need here. So let me do a brief recap of what brought us to this point. In the first session, we talked some about the role of caring for one another as a central feature of the church. Joretta talked a little bit about theological reflection, but we said building community means being attentive to one another, to caring for each other in the good times, the bad times, and the ordinary times of life, which is pretty much all the time. We said that hospitality and care doesn't belong exclusively or even primarily to the pastoral staff at a church. It belongs to the people, to all of us. And we said that we are more likely to be a strong community if we are able to carry out our mission, if we are able to tend to one another authentically, honestly, and deeply all the time. As Elizabeth said today, it's something about putting on the clothes of Christ to one another. And in that first session, we also identified what I called the core practices of care are. Talked about attitude, the attitude of being open and trustworthy and inviting to others. We talked about a caring presence, which had to do with the act of communicating and embodying that attitude. We talked about caring listening, where we convey to the other that their story matters and that we will receive it and hear it in a trustworthy and in an empathetic way. And we talked about caring questioning, where we find ways to invite the story forward through open-ended questions and other forms of questioning, what one of my favorite people calls asking the beautiful question. Mm-hmm. And then in our second session, we focused a bit more on what it means to be ready and able to offer care to one another. We talked about what it means to welcome the stranger, and that we all become the stranger at one point or another in our lives, when our circumstances are strange. Like when we experience deep grief, when we move through a time of personal or communal transition, and when the future we were planning on collapses. Those are times when we as members of a church community become strangers in the midst of that community that we know so well. And we offer care or receive care in the midst of that strangeness. And then we talked about the particular principles of good listening. We talked about that good listening is about presence, not doing. We talked about good listening is care, not cure. It's support, not control. And it's focus on the other, not on the self. We talked about active listening, making sure the other knows they're being heard accurately and deeply. And we talked about the importance of hearing the other with an appreciation for their strength and their resilience and their goodness, not defining them by the strangeness they're experiencing. And we said we would try to listen. If we were going to do this well, we would try to listen and invite them to tell the story in ways that made them stronger, not weaker. Which I don't know if, I mean, when I think about that, sometimes the way we invite people to tell their stories makes them weaker. We ask them to focus only on the tragic or their weakness. So how do you help them tell both the story of strangeness and the story of strength at the same time? And we said, these are some of the things we do when we're training people to be members of a care team at a church. So do you have any questions or comments about what we've covered in the last two sessions before we move on to consult together about what that looks like here at Hennepin? Yes. The subtle ways of fixing. Right. Yes. I know. Yeah. Yes, yes. Oh, you know what? This is a great question. And it's probably one that I hear the most often in these various training places, this deep concern, because we want to help. And that just says something about the nature of our good hearts. And I would distinguish between how you talk with a friend and how you engage in a care relationship. And there's a distinction. With a friend, I think we're kind of free because they know how to push back and there's not a power difference and there's a clear connection of history together and so on, so that I can say, are you nuts? You should be doing this, right? And I have. and that works. And you can say, have you thought about this? Or you can say in a wonderful way, would it be all right if I gave you some feedback? Those are great things in a friend relationship. When you get into a caregiving relationship, and this is hard, and I say it to myself as much as I'm saying it to the group here, the story belongs to them. So does the path through the story and into the next chapter. And if I try to write the story or even edit, I'm depriving them of the wisdom and strength that comes through resolving it. So if I'm with someone and I'm in a strange circumstance, I'm a stranger at that moment, I really hope the person, that my caregiver, will stand shoulder to shoulder with me in a loving way, will listen to me, will invite me, will witness for me what I'm experiencing, but I don't want her or him to take it from me. And if we can just hold on to that thought, that I used to be much more crass, I would say to students, this story not only doesn't belong to you, you have your own problems. And they deserve to own their own story. That's the gift. It's so tempting to break that rule, and we will, all the time. But if you can just keep it in the back of your mind that they will grow and find strength in the process of moving through the story. And it's their story. And I might think I know where this story is going. In fact, I used to race my clients in my own head sometimes to get to the end that I knew they were heading for, which of course meant I gave them the cues to go my way, didn't I? I learned not to do that after a few years. So yeah, you got to trust that it's their story and they will. That's what I mean when I say we have to listen in ways that affirm and acknowledge, and especially even to ourselves, that these are people of strength and resilience and possibility. Yeah. Thank you for the question, though. That's a great question. And I bet everyone here was thinking it. Yes. Absolutely.
Or do they want to? And that gives all the power to the person I'm talking to.
It does. It does. And that kind of gentle negotiation is a wonderful approach. The only challenge or thought I would give to that, and I've forgotten your name, I'm sorry. Liam? Dan. Dan, the only challenge or the only addition I would make to that is to say that sometimes we don't recognize our own influence. And if I ask somebody, would they like a hug? They often feel obliged to give it or receive it. Or if they ask, do you want to talk? They feel like there's a mandate in there somewhere. If they were good people, they would talk. And so we have to be aware, as much as we don't, and I would say most of us in here don't like the notion of power. When we move into a caregiving relationship, we have it, whether we want it or not. So those kinds of invitations are fraught, and yet lovingly and often happily received. So what guess about you is that you know how to read the cues before you even ask the question. So you know if the question wouldn't work in this circumstance.
I think part of my intent with that question is to do it from a strengths-based perspective, saying to the person I'm facing,
yes,
I believe in you.
Yes.
And somewhere in you, inside of you, you know what you need from me at this moment.
Yeah.
So tell me so that I don't step a wrong direction.
Yep. And like anything else, these are complex moments. They may or may not know what they need from you. We are vulnerable and we are strong. Those are tricky things. That's why we do the training, right? Why we work on this so much. Is there anyone else that might have a question or a comment before we move to what's it look like here? Anne.
In the past, our care ministry has pretty much
I could repeat the question if you just want to ask it.
has focused on I sort of lost my train of thought.
So in the past, our care team ministry has focused
on older people, and people who were shut in. And I think we need to be focusing on everybody.
That's a great lead into our next segment. Hold that voice.
I didn't know that, but
keep that voice right there, because that's where we're going to go.
Yeah, I mean, people are really lonely.
Yeah.
And
well, that's why we thought
families have little children and they don't have grandparents.
Yeah. But that's why we thought we'd start with this notion of connected in care as a whole church before we even moved to talking about care teams for specific situations. Thank you, Anne. That's right. Anyone else? Alan.
Sometimes as a person starts to tell me about them, I feel like I'm being honored.
Oh yeah.
So I thank them. I say thank you for telling me about you.
Yeah.
I appreciate getting to know you.
Yeah, yeah. It's a tricky thing, though, isn't it, Alan? Yes. I mean, of course, they're trusting us with their vulnerability. They are offering to open up, trusting that we won't reject or resist that. Right? I mean, yeah. And yet, if I thank them,
I'm not getting too specific, but I'm saying there's something I appreciate about your story.
Yeah. Right.
And but I'm not trying to lead them into.
No.
I appreciate A, B, and C.
Yeah. You know? No. You're saying I appreciate you as a person entering this relationship with me.
Yeah.
Did I get that? Yeah. So again, the complexities of these things that seem so straightforward, of course you're grateful. And thanking them seems like a wonderful and humble way of engaging them. And we have to ask the question, in thanking them, are we blurring at all the nature of the relationship? I'm here for you, you're not here for me. Just a thing to throw out there as part of our thinking. Right? And these things are subtle, but powerful. And you never know what's going to hit one person one way and one person, somebody else. So grateful for the thanks. You just never know. You have to watch for the cues. And always err on the side of caution. Yeah. Thank you. These are all wonderful ideas. So let me move to Hennepin, specifically. As Anne said, you've had your teams here. I've known, actually, 20 years ago, I don't know how many years ago, I came over and worked with the Stevens ministers for a while, so in terms of training. So I know you've had a long history here. And what can we make now that, as Anne suggested, addresses the new layers of need that have come upon us? I've been talking about it at Richfield Church with some people as we're experiencing emotional, spiritual, and social long COVID.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's something about what happened to us that has changed the ability of us to relate or to find peace or to find connection. We get in the habit of technologies. We forget what it's like to just go freely into the world and reconnect. Sometimes, not always, fortunately, here we are. So I will tell a brief story. About 3 weeks ago, I had a flood. I live in a condo. I live on the second floor of a condo. There's nothing more dangerous in a condo, not even fire, than water. So water leaked from a unit of air conditioning and air handling in my ceiling into my study. Yeah. I have all my books from all this 35, 40 years of being a teacher and a writer and academician. It missed most of the books, but it hit my supply closet where I had all sorts of paper and notes and files. And so I had to go through the whole thing. I hadn't looked for about 20 years, very deeply into it. And I came up with this. I have that same ringtone on my phone, Cooper. I do, the English hunting theme. Anyway, I came up with this, 3 pages. Elizabeth, do you recognize this paper?
I've seen that paper.
This was from Richfield Church 15 years ago, where we brainstormed, how do we create hospitality at this church? How do we, knowing our size, our limitations, and the possibilities, how do we care for one another? And so let me just read a few pieces of it. I have circles, because I tend to either think in circles or outline. And the first one said, what training is needed? Because that was going to be my role. We have grief support for caregivers, grief support for individuals, grief support in groups, grief support in one-on-ones. We had parish ministers who would do crisis care, who would visit people in the hospital or right at home shortly after an illness and would follow up. We had What would they need? Well, they'd need some training in listening and religious resources, in boundaries, on the nuts and bolts of hospitals, that kind of thing. We said, hospitality ministry, what might that be? Well, what about funeral meals? That's hospitality. How do you make those even more hospitable, more sensitive to what's going on? We said, what about new babies? What do we do about long-term caregivers? How do we offer hospitality in ways that don't feel condescending or one more thing they have to do? We talked about mentors for transition times. Is there a mentor who could walk with somebody over time in their trying to refigure out what their future narrative is going to look like? We talked about doing that in small groups. We talked about doing that individually. We talked about how do you train a congregation as a whole to be responsive if they see a need, some of the things we've been talking about. We said there are many layers of care needed here. Creating a caring congregation, creating conversations and observations among us, creating committees that actually tended a bit to each other rather than just dragging out business for hours and hours. Sorry, I'm sure that doesn't happen here, but I did some study on that. Maybe I told you the first time that meetings, church meetings, business meetings are much more efficient by a factor of like 4 if they start the meeting with checking in with each other, because otherwise that stuff finds its way into the meeting in other ways and drags it out. So there are some very practical and tender reasons to care for one another, even in committees. We talked about things like milestones: new home, new child, graduation, confirmation, baptism, new job, retirement, right? I mean, those are happy transitions that cause a real upheaval, oftentimes for families. And we talked about preemptive support, not a great word, preemptive support, couple classes, enrichment classes, maybe a body and soul group, maybe equipping elders for pre-retirement. Not that I think retirement should be called elders, but how do you help people think about their future life when we've all thought up to retirement about our lives? So these are some of the things we considered. And then I ended up with this page, which began to shape a plan. What groups would we form? In what order? How would we recruit volunteers? Would it be by invitation? Would it be whoever wants to do this kind of ministry should come and do it? What do different kinds of caregivers need for being equipped? So we began to mobilize. And at Richfield right now, I'm not saying this as a model because it's a very different church. At Richfield right now, we have parish ministers who accompany or mentor or walk with people over a year to a year and a half of a major life transition, divorce, an imprisonment of a family member, a big loss. There are lots of reasons that we might get involved. Retirement's one of them. We have parish ministers who go to hospitals, although not as often anymore. It's often a post-hospital visit or phone call, more likely, so they don't trouble people who are trying to heal. A card periodically during that recovery period. We have care ministers, and which focuses on that group that you were talking about, folks who can't get into church anymore, and they have kind of a permanent relationship with somebody in the church that visits at least monthly and has maybe a meal with them. We have a team of in-home communion bringers who have been trained on boundaries and ritual and listening and how to engage in an in-home communion ritual and noticing if there's a tear, with comfort to stop in the middle and allow things to surface without putting the prayer as the taillights on the visit. You know, those sorts of conversations we have as we train. We have funeral teams, we have food teams, we have So my belief is the more people you can train in the congregation at any level, the more attentive and empowered that congregation is to claim the church as their own and to care for one another. That's sort of the bottom line of all of this. So that is Richfield Church. What do we need here? I'm going to ask you to gather at your tables. Just turn toward each other. I'm only going to give you about 3 minutes. So think fast. What are the needs of this church? Okay, I'll give you 5. Because this is, what are the needs of the church? What's being met well? And where are the gaps? Okay? Start with the first question, and then we'll come back to the second. Just start with the first. What are the needs of this church? Around care, right? Around a caring ministry. Okay, go. Yeah. Okay. Okay, what'd you come up with? Let's write it down. Thank you. What do we got? These are needs, right? Monthly?
Can you repeat them when they're said?
Okay, the solution was, so there's a need for seniors to gather socially and to have a connection with the church. So the solution was monthly senior groups with food truck, right? What other needs? Yes.
Preferences and skills with opportunities.
So matching skills with needs.
Well, we also talked about starting from the very beginning.
About what?
People come in here, they need mentors. I mean, this is a church that has deep relationships and then hardly any relationships, and not much in the middle. You know, when people come into the church, you know, they sometimes leave because they don't get to know somebody. I think we have a mentoring program for people newly coming into the church.
Stayed here about 7 years.
Wait, just a second. Wait, we've got people on.
Yes.
Yes, let me say what that was. A desire to bring mentors in for people who are newer to the church, who haven't formed deep connections of history and shared experience, and that oftentimes people leave because they haven't made those connections. I have to say, I was a member of Hennepin. That's why I left. I just would stand in the coffee hour and look around, and nobody talked to me. And that felt so awkward, and it wasn't the right place in my mind at that point.
Yeah, I was going to say, I felt the same way and still do very often. I've been here 7 years, and I know a small number of people, but not a large number, because I'm not an extrovert. But what kept me here at the beginning is we had a person at the time on staff who was a connections person. And every Sunday I came, she'd call me by name. She'd ask me what I was interested in, what I was doing, and she'd come up with things that needed to be done. And so we need somebody to transfer all the cassettes in our archives to digitize them. I said, that's right up my alley. I can do that. And every Sunday, Cheryl Gibbons was there making that connection. But we had someone there who had that heart and who had that kind of as their job description, as finding all the new people and targeting them every Sunday.
Right. So the metaphor for that for me is what you said, being called by name. Thank you.
I was surprised at how many different options you offered, and you were talking about what was going on at Richfield. There's people or things tend to be successful if people enjoy what they're doing. And there's a part of me that feels as though if ideas were presented to the congregation and then people could gravitate toward what it is they'd want to do. And so rather than trying to find things to ask people to be a part of, but they're only going to be semi-interested in, I think rather if we presented ideas to the congregation, and so what is it that people want to do? And that way we can do those things well because people want to do them.
Yeah. And two responses to that from the Richfield experience. there are groups that gather of caregivers and get trained on, I mean, I meet with the parish companions monthly, and we have talked everything from the Odyssey, you know, where's God in bad times, to the mechanics of asking a good question. The entire, what are the grief dynamics that we could sort of expect? What does a divorce look like for some people? You know, we talk about everything. They have told me many times they feel like I should be granting them a degree. But that has become a mini church for us. And I would say even the care ministers, they meet quarterly, do some training like this. We work on listening especially. Those are places of gathering and care. So they enjoy it. Having that, they want to go out and bring that to somebody else. So that's one. The second, I should have mentioned this right away. The reason we can do what we do, I mean, I serve as, I don't remember what my name is anymore over there, head consultant or something to the pastoral care teams, but it runs because we have a parish nurse who visits people, who knows when people have had a crisis, who follows up when one of our caregivers says something's not quite right here. I don't want to, I can't do this. I can't address this by myself. She makes the phone calls, she checks in with people, she follows up 6 weeks after a caregiver starts going to whether it's an older person's home or a person in crisis. So our parish nurse is the linchpin of a program like this. There has to be a linchpin as well. So I like all of your ideas. Ask the congregation what works for them, and find ways to make it meaningful and bring pleasure.
And I think what happens, you had some ideas that were great that might not occur to us as congregants. Yeah. And so we might not know what we want to do, but then when we see a list, oh, that's something that would be appealing to me, and I might never have thought of it.
Yeah. So maybe a full court push for what lay caregiving might look like in a church like this. See, the problem is we come in, Joretta and I, we don't know what it looks like in a place like this. We know what it looks like at Hennepin because we worked over 15 years to create these teams. The other thing, oh shoot, it dropped out of my mind again. It'll come back, but it was related to a point. Yes.
I'm just real quick. I think one of the real needs too is a paradigm shift, that pastoral care or congregational care is the work of the people.
Yes, absolutely.
We are resources, and we're committed to being resources, clergy, but it's robustly the work of the people.
Absolutely. And the main thing that and in fact, the first week we were here, Joretta was trying to present the notion that the church belongs to us.
Right.
To people, and not to I mean, especially in the United Methodist system, clergy rotate. They circuit ride their way in and out of places. The people remain.
I'd like to see more ongoing groups that meet in person before and after the service.
Ah.
Not ongoing.
Yeah. No. That's on the horizon.
Oh.
As God is my witness.
On the horizon.
Yes.
Groups that meet before church, could they meet after church too?
Before
and after. You'd have an audience at that point of people who are here, right?
Christie, in our group, Cooper used a good phrase, social anxiety. And we've been talking about, so it's that kind of maybe atmosphere of care, not specific like visits or things, but how to feel like we belong or welcome, or we're encountering someone who recognizes us by not
name.
Even by name, but just, hey, eyes or something.
Yeah. And I think we're always so afraid if we go up to somebody and say, are you new here? They're not. And then you feel foolish. So how do we get, you know how I said care is about the other and not the self? How do we get the fear out of the way so that we can just walk up to somebody and say, I think I know you, but I can't remember your name. right? I mean, it's a simple social formula, but it's that kind of just deepening connections all the time, paying attention. We love our own groups. Any of us are guilty of wanting to seek out the people we've missed during the week. And we have to shift that. Both, you know, we meet the people we miss and then greet the people we don't know. Even if we look foolish. Yeah, somebody has a mic.
Excuse me, there's another issue, is that there are people who are really overbooked with their time and their social media and whatever, you know, somehow in the past 10 years, people are working a whole heck of a lot more. And we need to respond to, how do you get off of that merry-go-round? And I don't know if it's part of the care team. I guess maybe.
It's part of hospitality. It's part of hospitality. I would call that one of the preemptive groups. How do you have a 3-week or 2-week, 1-week session for people who are too busy to come to a class, which is what you could title it. Come to the class you're too busy to attend. And talk about how you create an environment that gives you more space. That could be done. What other gaps? What other needs? What other, yes?
I don't know what the person who's sitting directly across from me.
What is your name, sir?
My name is Brad, and what is your name? Phil? As Phil was saying, he's been a member here for 7 years and still has the feeling of being relatively new. Well, maybe a specific social group designed for new members to get to meet each other. That might be simpler, because for people who are well-grounded here, that would take more of an effort to get to know new people. Whereas for new people to get to know each other, it's easier that way for newer people then to meet each other.
Yep, that might be a really good add-on to have a group for people. It would also be great if we could treat each Sunday coffee hour as a, what do you call it when you have to go out and find things that a scavenger hunt.
Oh, scavenger. Yeah.
A scavenger hunt for connection. Wouldn't that be fun? No, they don't think so. Are they shaking their heads?
I know for me, gaps wise, I'm very concerned about follow-up with people who are grieving, with staying connected with people who can't get to church. I know that there's an informal network of people who do that here, but I don't know what it is. And so it would really help my pastor's heart to have a sense of who the population is and how can we make sure that we have relationships established so that when someone like John Seif dies in Florida, we hear about it from his family because they know that he's connected here.
Yes. And I'm going to add to that. So being notified at the very least, follow through on that. Yeah. And a phone call to someone who would be connected and caring about that, whether it's a family member or, we have now gotten to the point where we call everyone who has lost someone in the church. We call them and we say, it is our policy, it is our practice to invite you to be part of a team that will just visit with you once a month and walk with you through this time of transition. It's not a big deal. We're not singling them out. It is our practice to do this. And if you do that, you know, you can really make a difference. And for a long time, it was, how do you do it with, how do you know which grief is more important? Well, now we just don't distinguish. I used to tell people, you're with somebody who says they lost their earring. You don't know whether they lost an earring that they bought at some place or that was the last memory they had of their grandmother.
Yeah.
A lost earring can have pretty great significance.
Mm-hmm.
We are beyond our time. I love this group because you talk and you wonder and you hope. And the question for me is, what next?
Yeah, what next?
What next?
Well, I can share my hope.
Let's hear it.
I hate this. My hope is that we'll create a team of people who will meet together and start to build, do the sort of lists that Christie did, that I was at the table for, to list the sorts of things that we could be thinking about together. And what we did at Richfield was we had these various teams so that people who weren't natural caregivers, and there are lots of us like that, that's good, but maybe like to serve coffee or at a, maybe not that either, okay? But we have varieties of gifts. And so there'll be some who will be drawn to one aspect and some to another. But if you all are willing to meet, to do some talking about the waterfront here in Hennepin.
I have a sign-up sheet for anybody who might be interested at all.
It should be coming around. It's all there.
Oh, there's one here. Okay. If you're is that just an attendance list, or this is a list for people who would like to be called?
I took it off the
oh. That's teamwork, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Can I say one more word about what you were saying? Just a moment. One more word about Pastor Elizabeth's point, which is that it's good if you're going to form a team like this, if you're going to form a project like this, that you have more than one kind of team. And that was your point, that we make sure that the people that if you have caregivers of all kinds, including a funeral team that goes out and puts food out, bars out for the, or somebody who is a greeter. Actually, I'm proposing at Richfield that we have a greeter and a grabber. A greeter greets people when they come in. A grabber makes sure that they've been acknowledged before they leave.
That's a thought.
What? Yes, God. Did you say something? Juanita.
No, yeah, I guess I said that was a thought.
Yeah. I like the term grabber, especially, don't you?
Yeah, I guess I'm probably just restating what you all are saying. I'm just putting it in different words. That we are looking to create structure from the ideas that have been floating out.
That's it. So we're going to contact you, or someone's going to contact you and say, can you continue this brainstorming now in smaller groups and see if we can create a structure that provides for as many as we can. All right? If you're not willing to be called or emailed about that, come up and scratch your name off the list, because we're using that list. Yeah. And I'm going to end with just a sense of appreciation and my best wishes for you all as you put this together. It makes a remarkable difference for a church. Amen.
Thanks, Christie. Thank you.